Welcome to Sharp Angle. Today we're diving into one of the most controversial and alarming developments in the Middle East, Israel's plan for a massive offensive to seize Gaza City. Is this a decisive military move, or is it political theater, designed to strengthen the government's image at home? And, most importantly, what does this mean for us here in America? That's the angle we're taking today. Over the past week, Israel has mobilized nearly 60,000 reservists for a large-scale operation aimed at taking full control of Gaza City. According to The Guardian, the military push is being presented as an essential step to eliminate Hamas strongholds. Israeli officials describe this as a matter of national survival. But critics, including humanitarian groups and even some within Israel itself, are warning that this plan could trigger a humanitarian catastrophe. The United Nations and the Red Cross have already issued dire warnings that such an assault could leave tens of thousands of civilians displaced without food, water, or medical care. That's not just a regional problem. In today's interconnected world, it's an international one. Now, let's be clear, this is not the first time Israel has launched a major military operation in Gaza. But what makes this different is the scale and the timing. Analysts from The Economist point out that Prime Minister Netanyahu faces intense domestic pressure, with protests inside Israel growing louder over corruption charges and the government's handling of the economy. For him, a bold military move could serve as a distraction, a way to project strength and rally nationalist support, even if the humanitarian cost is staggering. This isn't new. Leaders under fire have often looked outward, using military campaigns to shore up political standing. We've seen this movie before. So why should ordinary Americans care about yet another flare-up in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Let's break it down. First, there's the humanitarian angle. Polling in the U.S. now shows that a majority of Americans, across party lines, are increasingly uncomfortable with the scale of Israel's military campaigns. According to recent surveys, nearly 60% believe the operations are disproportionate, and more than half support international recognition of Palestinian statehood. That matters because elected officials read those numbers, and they shape policy. It's no longer just about being pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. It's about how the average voter feels when they see children pulled from rubble on their phone screen during a morning coffee. Second, there's the geopolitical dimension. Every time violence escalates in Gaza, the entire Middle East feels the shockwaves. Regional powers like Iran, Turkey, and Egypt are already positioning themselves. Iran frames itself as the champion of Palestinian resistance. Turkey tries to balance diplomacy with opportunism, and Egypt braces for potential refugee flows that could destabilize its already struggling economy. And here's the kicker. When tensions rise in the Middle East, global oil markets react instantly. If the fighting intensifies, oil prices could spike, pushing up gasoline costs right here in the U.S. We've already seen how fragile our wallets are when gas prices climb. Remember last summer when a sudden spike added $50 a month to your fuel bill? Imagine that on top of rising food and rent prices. That's how their conflict becomes our problem. Third, America's image abroad is directly tied to how we handle this crisis. For decades, U.S. support for Israel has been described as ironclad. But that iron is starting to rust in the eyes of many around the world. European allies are increasingly vocal in criticizing Israel's tactics, with leaders in France and Germany openly calling for restraint. Humanitarian organizations are calling out what they see as violations of international law. If Washington continues to stand firmly behind Israel without conditions, the U.S. risks being seen not as a promoter of peace, but as an enabler of endless war. That damages our credibility not just in the Middle East, but everywhere, from Latin America to Asia. And then there's the political fallout at home. Let's not kid ourselves. Foreign policy doesn't usually win or lose American elections, but it can shape the narrative. If images of suffering civilians dominate the news cycle, if gas prices climb again, if college campuses erupt in protests, all of that becomes part of the domestic political conversation. President Biden, or whoever sits in the Oval Office, will have to answer tough questions. Why are we sending billions in aid to Israel while Americans struggle with healthcare, housing, and wages? Why is there always money for bombs abroad, but not for fixing bridges at home? Those are powerful sound bites in any election season. To be fair, Supporters of Israel argue that the U.S. benefits strategically from this alliance. They emphasize intelligence sharing, military cooperation, and having a strong partner in a volatile region. They'll say that abandoning Israel now would embolden its enemies and destabilize the Middle East even further. There's truth in that argument, but the counterpoint is equally strong. If Israel's military campaigns create more instability, more refugees, and more anti-American sentiment across the Arab world, then the U.S. may end up weaker, not stronger. Let's zoom out for a moment. What's happening in Gaza is not just about Israel and Hamas. It's about how the world order is shifting. China is hosting summits with Russia and the United Nations, positioning itself as a mediator in conflicts where the U.S. looks one-sided. Meanwhile, America's adversaries are quick to seize on every bombing raid and every civilian death as propaganda fuel. In the global information war, perception is reality. And right now, the perception is that America is backing an ally at all costs, regardless of consequences. That's not the image Washington wants, but it's the one many people see. This brings us to another critical point: the ripple effects for American communities. For working-class families, the most immediate impact could be economic. Higher gas prices, rising inflation, and another drain on federal resources. For college students, it could mean a surge in campus activism, with protests and debates that echo the Vietnam War era. For American soldiers, it could mean increased deployments to the Middle East or surrounding areas, stretching an already strained military. And for politicians, it means more sleepless nights figuring out how to balance foreign commitments with domestic discontent. Let's dig even deeper into the politics here. Inside the U.S. Congress, divisions are already visible. Progressive Democrats are calling for conditions on aid to Israel, while Republicans largely argue for unconditional support. This split isn't just a Washington squabble. It reflects broader generational and cultural divides in America. Younger voters, especially, are far more critical of Israel's actions. That could shape the 2026 midterms and even the 2028 presidential race. Imagine a scenario where foreign policy, usually a back-burner issue, suddenly becomes a central campaign topic. It's possible, especially if gas hits $6 a gallon and nightly news keeps showing devastation in Gaza. Another angle worth noting is the economic one. The U.S. is already running massive deficits, with debt levels reaching record highs. Every dollar sent abroad to finance another conflict is a dollar not spent at home. Some economists warn that continued military aid could weaken the dollar in the long run. And if the dollar loses strength, the average American feels it immediately through higher prices on imported goods, from electronics to groceries. Think about it. The debate over Israel isn't just foreign policy. It's about your grocery bill, your mortgage rate, and whether your paycheck keeps up with costs. History also matters here. America has a long track record of being pulled deeper into Middle Eastern conflicts than originally planned. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. All of these began with limited missions and ballooned into costly quagmires. Supporters of restraint point out that Gaza could become another chapter in that book. What begins as writing checks for military aid could escalate into more direct involvement, whether through advisors, intelligence, or eventual deployments. And once you're in, getting out is never simple. Israel's own history offers cautionary tales. In 1982, it invaded Lebanon with the stated goal of rooting out militants. What followed was an 18-year occupation, heavy casualties, and deep political division at home. More recently, operations in Gaza in 2008 and 2014 produced destruction but not decisive victory. If Gaza City is occupied now, what's the endgame? Who governs the ruins? Who pays to rebuild? Without answers, Israel risks repeating old mistakes, and America risks being dragged into them. Meanwhile, the regional dynamic is shifting rapidly. Saudi Arabia, once a quiet partner of Israel in countering Iran, is now recalculating its stance. If Riyadh distances itself from Israel because of global backlash, Washington loses an important diplomatic lever. Iran, on the other hand, seizes every opportunity to frame itself as the defender of Palestinians, increasing its influence in the Arab world. For ordinary Americans, these shifts may seem distant, but they matter. They shape energy markets, trade flows, and even the safety of U.S. troops stationed abroad. And then there's the media landscape. In today's world, perception often matters more than facts. Images of bombed-out neighborhoods and children pulled from rubble travel instantly across social media. For Americans scrolling their feeds, these images provoke anger, sympathy, and frustration. They also fuel debates about where U.S. tax dollars should go. The Biden administration, or any future administration, will be forced to navigate not only the diplomatic fallout, but also the information war at home. Politicians ignore the power of viral images at their own risk. Let's not forget the security angle. Every major escalation in Gaza risks inspiring extremist groups worldwide. Intelligence agencies in the U.S. warn that militant organizations may use the crisis as a recruitment tool, raising the threat of attacks closer to home. That means more resources diverted to counterterrorism, more airport security, and more tension in communities that already feel marginalized. For the average American, this could translate into longer lines at airports, more surveillance, and a gnawing sense of unease. Let's talk numbers for a moment. Since World War II, the United States has provided Israel with more than $150 billion in military and economic aid. Currently, the annual package stands at about $3.8 billion a year, roughly $10 million a day. Supporters say that's a small price for having a reliable ally in a volatile region. Critics argue it's money that could fix roads, fund schools, or provide healthcare here at home. Put simply, while Israel launches airstrikes, Americans are paying the tab. The U.S. defense industry is also part of this picture. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, and Raytheon benefit directly from arms sales and military assistance programs. For them, crises mean contracts. For taxpayers, it means dollars funneled into weapons instead of wages. The military-industrial complex, as President Eisenhower once warned, thrives in times of war. And right now, business is booming. Even within the American Jewish community, there is no consensus. Older generations and traditional organizations tend to offer unconditional support for Israel. But younger Jewish Americans are increasingly critical, joining protests and demanding a rethinking of U.S. policy. That divide is important because it challenges the political narrative that all Jewish voters support the same stance. In reality, just like the rest of America, they are divided, and politicians have to navigate that reality. Looking ahead, there are a few scenarios. 1. Israel's offensive is short and sharp, weakening Hamas, but leaving Gaza in ruins. 2. The conflict drags on, turning into a drawn-out occupation with high costs and casualties. 3. International pressure mounts, forcing negotiations and perhaps a new push for a two-state solution. Each path carries different consequences for America, economically, politically, and morally. And here's where the political theater comes in. Some analysts suggest that this operation is less about defeating Hamas and more about playing to Netanyahu's domestic audience. If that's the case, then Americans are essentially being dragged into someone else's drama, footing the bill, suffering the consequences, while Israel's leadership scores political points. That's not exactly the kind of foreign policy deal most Americans signed up for. At the end of the day, Israel's offensive in Gaza City forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How long can the U.S. keep writing checks for wars abroad? How much should we risk our own economy and global standing for the sake of one ally? And are we really protecting American interests, or just perpetuating endless conflict? The world isn't short on crises. From climate change to economic inequality, to our own political divisions, America has plenty on its plate. Yet here we are again, deeply entangled in a conflict thousands of miles away. It's a sobering reminder that in our interconnected world, there's no such thing as a distant war. Every bomb dropped abroad carries a price tag that eventually lands in our own mailbox. Welcome to Sharp Angle, where we cut through the noise and ask the questions that matter. So here's one for you. Is America standing by its values? Or is it just stuck in a cycle of supporting war at any cost? Because, one way or another, the answer is going to hit home, at the gas pump, in your wallet, and maybe even at the ballot box.